So great to have you all with us again. This is the third of our learning series. Today, we're going to hear from panelists that are a part of our New Frontier Forum group and really be able to speak to both our times a little bit more than we've done already, and also think about how the forum experience can particularly help us think about the reckoning our country is facing around justice and racial equity and all other forms of equity as we move into the fall. I'd like to play for you just at the start the New Frontier Award video that aired at the DNC this past week for inspiration into our conversation. And really think about the legacy not only of President Kennedy and the New Frontier he inspired for Americans to be a part of, but also the ongoing civil rights legacy and movement that continues today, and particularly from the figures I shared and some of the pieces we shared in the learning series guide, Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis. So let's start with that video, and I'll hand it over to Jordan. Thanks.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier.
As my father accepted the Democratic nomination for president, he looked to the future and challenged Americans to join him on a journey toward a new frontier.
That spirit is kept alive today by a new generation of leaders. The New Frontier Award celebrates men and women from the public and private sector who are answering my grandfather's call to service.
The new frontier of which I speak.
The new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises.
It's not a set of promises. It is a set of challenges.
It is a set of challenges.
It sums up not what I intend to offer the American people,
but what I intend to ask of them.
It holds out the promise of more sacrifice
instead of more security.
The new frontier is here,
whether we seek it or not.
Beyond that frontier
are uncharted areas of science and space.
Unsolved problems of peace
and war, unconquered problems of ignorance and prejudice,
unanswered questions of poverty and surplus.
I believe that the times require imagination
and courage and perseverance.
I'm asking each one of you to be pioneers toward that new frontier.
For courage, not complacency,
is our need today.
Leadership, not salesmanship.
And the only valid test of leadership
is the ability to lead
and lead vigorously.
The New Frontier Award celebrates both public and private sector nonprofit leaders who are making a real difference at a young age, not only for our country, but for other areas of the world as well. And I'm very pleased that Jordan Wilson is able to moderate our discussion today. Jordan has been involved with the Institute of Politics at Harvard for a number of years. She comes as a member of our New Frontier Network Steering Committee and is also the founder of Politicking, an app that connects a new generation of citizens to information and voting materials for for the future. Sorry, my dog is at the door with someone. But Jordan really represents the best of what we're excited to offer in the next generation and new generations. But our conversation today is true to that cross-sector intergenerational discussion that we hope that the forums are able to offer too. So I'll turn it over to Jordan and come back in at the end. But thank you all for being here. It's great to see you all again. And I'll let Jordan take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for that kind introduction. I'll also take the barking from your dog as an endorsement or some sort of shout of support also. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I think today will be certainly inefficient program, but nonetheless an important one. We're all here today to talk about a network for our courage. None of us is as powerful as all of us as it comes to the current fight for systemic change and justice. We'll hear from our fabulous panelists. I'm joined today with three gentlemen who have certainly fulfilled JFK's call for us to absolutely be the change that we want to see in this country. And so without no further ado, I'll introduce the three of them, starting with Gregory Dyson, who serves currently as the Chief Operating Officer at ANA Enterprise. Mr. Dyson also serves on the executive leadership team, and he also provides oversight for technology, human resources, organizational development, the Office of General Counsel, and the Enterprise Executive Office. In the past, he received the National Leadership Award from the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, so he certainly is a leader in innovation and public service. Terik Ham, Dr. Terik Ham is an associate professor and department head of art and design at North Carolina State University's College of Design. His research expertise spans the areas of game-based learning, algorithmic thinking, and immersive media, which is very cool. In 2019, the North Carolina State University also invested in the lab spin-out of Logic Grip, which is a startup that produces VR content and develops new VR hardware and peripheral services. And then last, we have Terik Tidwell, who's the Director of STEM Innovation and Executive Director of the Smith Tech Innovation Center at Johnson C. Smith University. So a little HBCU love. I'm a graduate from Howard, which I told you, Terik. Where at Johnson C. Smith is where he connects STEM education and workforce development coupled with high growth entrepreneurship and economic development. Prior to his time at Johnson C. Smith, he was an Education Pioneers Fellow, engagement manager, business strategist, solution architect, and research analyst working in business, nonprofit, and education. And so while we certainly are joined with very esteemed and prestigious fellows, we're going to get into some really simple questions. Gentlemen, I hope you all are doing well today. And I first want to start with Gregory and ask, how are we viewing this reckoning for social justice, civil rights, and systemic change? And how might you respond to the reckoning? This is certainly a time that many of us have changed, so to speak. We talk a lot about compassion. We talk a lot about not settling for anything less than the justice that we all deserve. But I'm curious how this particular time is having an impact on the three of you.
Oh, thank you, Jordan, and good afternoon to everyone. I think this is a time for action. It is a call to action. It's reminiscent of what President Kennedy said 60 years ago and a week ago when talking about a new frontier, and how we began the 1960s with hope and aspiration and ended it at the end of that decade with achievement and accomplishment with the man on the moon. But in between then, a lot happened, a lot of pain and suffering in our individual communities. And that is where we are today. When we talk about a new frontier, the new frontier is one today where there is economic justice, there's social justice, as we look for housing, as we look at jobs, as we look at one time being education was the ticket to the middle class. Today, it's often the ticket to bankruptcy and unemployment. So we now are looking at a different view, and that's this new frontier. New, yes, it is. The frontier means it's vast, and we have a lot. And we have a lot to do. And as leaders, we are called to do it with passion, with empathy for one another, with love and hope for our future. As John Lewis told us over 40 years of his life and his hard work, and it was hard work and what he did for all of us to benefit him, and especially people like myself, because I benefited from his marching and all the injuries that he took along the way. But he said, when you see something, say something, do something. And there are many, our numbers are vast. All of us here, our numbers are vast, and we are called to do something, to take action. It is not a time to sit on the sidelines and observe and think that things are going to change because others are going to do it. We are all called to lead, and we can contribute by participating in that dialogue and taking action to address those issues that are first and foremost in our minds around social justice, economic justice, financial justice, educational justice. It's art. This is our time, and it's not generational. It's for all of our peoples, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of age. Now is the time for action. The frontier is vast and the work is enormous.
You're absolutely right. It is. And, the fight, just like politics, for systemic change is not a spectator sport. We can't sit back and expect things to happen, and for certainly our elected officials and public leaders to start to become receptive if, again, we all are not contributing. Terik, how are you on this issue?
Good, thanks, Jordan. I agree with everything that Gregory said. This is a call for action. And I think that has been one of the things, which is, what are we going to do given this reckoning? Well, what can we do? And I think that's going to come up more in the conversation. And I just look at it and say, this is kind of a sense of saying that there's been some injustices that have happened that haven't really been dealt with, that really haven't really been brought to the forefront and at this sustained level, right? I was just looking at, watching a basketball game last night and just looking at how prominent these issues are when you look at the players with these different kinds of words of encouragement or words of issues, like say her name, Black Lives Matter on the court. I think what we're seeing is that this is raising the unconsciousness of America that Black lives do matter, that we haven't really dealt with the past. We may have brushed over it. We may have put it in the ground and hope that good seeds will come from it. But there really hasn't been too much of that watering and opportunity for many communities that have been left behind. And as we look at moving this country forward, we really got to look at the least amongst us and those who have been overlooked and underserved for so long, for them to be able to participate in what we really call the American dream.
Absolutely. Terik, I'd be so curious to hear from you how this moment of reckoning has impacted you, and of course, how you see it as an opportunity for others to fall in.
Thanks, Jordan. One of the things that that keeps me up at night is this weird juxtaposition between this time for reckoning, the time for us to take action, but also a generation that has a reducing level of able to comprehend and focus on things. When you look at something like TikTok, which is a 60-second platform, you look at something like Twitter, which is 280 characters. That saddens me that if we are moving towards a society that can't sit and hear a story, because for us to move forward, we have to keep the storytellers. We have to tell the narratives. We can't forget the past. But how can we do this if our attention spans are reducing to the length of 60 seconds and 280 characters? This is a challenge for all of us, and a challenge that we have to meet together, because if we're going to move forward, we have to slow ourselves, tell our stories, listen, and hear each other in a society that's combating the way in which we want to do that.
Terik, you made an easy segue for me into the next question, and you talked about how this even impacts your consciousness, how a lot of what you're saying is not going to be something that's impactful for us in the future. And what I want to know is, and again, we'll go with our regular flow, Gregory, how has your consciousness changed? What can we do to actually advance that awakeness? And as the issues, of course, in our larger world continue to occur, how can we stay focused on this present moment? I'll tell the audience, you and I had a chance to have a conversation about keeping the momentum going. The news cycles kind of just overload us with new things constantly, but We all know the fight for systemic change and civil rights is nothing new, and particularly the issues that we're dealing with now. And so what can we do to keep the wheel turning, obviously, but to actually stay focused on actually pursuing results in this moment?
Absolutely. I mean, Derek brings up an interesting point. We're down to 60 seconds on a TikTok video and 270 characters on a Twitter feed. But guess what, people? We sat through 8 minutes and 47 seconds of murder. So if we can set through 8 minutes and 47 seconds of murder, that was our call to action. That was what woke us up. That got us beyond 60 seconds. That got us beyond 270 characters. We need to take that and amplify that forward and all in our work and what we are doing in our communities. That's how we carry the momentum. As I will say to people, if you can, tweet for 270 characters, and God forbid, we put that horrendous, murderous pornography on for 8 minutes and 47 seconds, we can make a difference. We can chart a different path. The issues that we face around economic insecurity and social injustice, let's stand up for those issues for 8 minutes and 47 seconds. That's how we honor the memory of George Floyd. That's how we honor the memory of many others who've gone before in their hard work, is take that to the next level. We were awakened by that 8 minute and 47 second video. Let's bring that to life in what we do and begin to make a difference in our communities.
Absolutely. How about you, Terik? How has your consciousness changed, and what can we actually do to facilitate some sort of larger awakening?
Great question, Jordan. I would say over the last 3 months, just being a part of this has just opened my eyes up to understanding more about this level of intergenerational knowledge, support, and engagement. Right, being engaged from those who are in the silver, the silver group, down to those who are emerging in the TikTok users, the Twitter users, and just an understanding, how do we engage the entire spectrum? Right, there's a piece of it which is there's folks who are in the tweets and TikTok and Instagram groups, all the way to those who are still reading the traditional newspapers, who are really looking to have conversations around these critical issues. How do we begin to help converge those different kinds of thoughts and engagements across this level of the spectrum of folks who are looking to be engaged? Now, from my thing is, just over the weekend, I had a conversation where I called one of my favorite, guys who I've been working with for about the last 1 or 2 years, and I call it a safe space for divergence. This is someone who is a very strong Republican vet, and has not been on that side of the fence to understand these issues, but by our close relationship over the last 2 years, or over the last 18 months, I would say, is being able to be open up to difference and having dialogue. I think about that there's a time right now where so many people are not open for dialogue, and that creates or exacerbates some of these conditions that we're currently seeing, that is continuously being compounded over time. So I think, we want to be able to create more safe spaces for divergence of opinions, and where people can actually have great conversations, that can actually begin to understand across their differences versus being isolated by their similarities.
Thank you, Terik. And if we're creating those spaces for divergence, as you suggested, and if we're staying awake and not just kind of, paying attention to these things for a moment, as Gregory suggested, what else can we do, Derek, in addition to keep the momentum going and ensure that we're all awakened, and that one of us isn't just ringing the alarm to, a bunch who aren't actually paying that much attention or taking this opportunity to really stand up seriously?
Right. The thing that the word that comes to my mind is this idea of courage. And it's something that's easy to say, you mentioned the HBCU connection. I went to Hampton when I did my undergrad. Oh yeah. We're not going to get into that. But no, when you're in environments that are culturally dense, it's easy to champion these issues and talk about these things. But for those of us who are in predominantly white environments, and for those of us who work in these other spaces, how do we have the courage to bring that consciousness to our work in a way, all right, that is able to open the eyes of others? It's a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge. I come from the lens of academia and the whole notion of being on a tenure track when you're a junior faculty. A friend of mine recently had to fight for his tenure because the work he was doing was related to the African American diaspora. And so how do you bring your consciousness to your colleagues, to your work, and you fight for these things with the potential risk, right, of being labeled, oh, the person who only talks about those issues, or the person that, oh, they're only going to be dealing with this or that, and trying to marginalize your rich concern with these things. So it really takes a time for courage for us all across the board to not compartmentalize and say, you know what, I'm going to come in here, I'm just going to work and keep my blinders on, and then my consciousness will come on like a mask after 5 p.m. on the weekends. And that's something I don't have all the answers to. It's something that I'm even working through right now. How do we have the courage to bring these discussions into these spaces where it is not on the minds and hearts of everyone that you work with?
Paul Laurence Dunbar in his poem talks about the mask that we all wear in our day-to-day lives. I mean, I encourage all of us, regardless, again, color or gender or age, take off that mask and let's have the courage to speak up and to say something. It's called work for a reason. That's because it's hard. It's not easy, and if I want, others to speak up, I'm gonna have to speak up. And do I want to be branded as the person who's bringing up the Black issues? Yes, I do. Because if you're not going to talk about them, I guess it falls upon me to talk about those issues. So we have to move out of our sense of ambivalence, and whether it's a race issue, a gender issue, economic issue that's foreign, to you, you need to speak. I encourage everyone to get your voice on the table. You might be surprised sometimes to hear someone else who may side with you or share your point of view and have some meaningful discussion. I have to go, and the other point I want to make, it is consistency. On the negative side, our country has been consistently racist for 400 years. So we should be consistently, positive that it should be addressed for the next 400 as part of our new frontier. So consistency does come into play.
You're absolutely right. You also mentioned perhaps my favorite poem, and it's very brief, so I just kind of would like to read it to everyone who hasn't had a chance to actually ever read or hear it. And it's We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise and counting all our tears and sighs? Yea, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but O great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is bile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. And of course, Paul Laurence Dunbar, being the famous Black poet that he is, spoke, I believe, about African Americans at that time. But to your point, Gregory, I think this is a message that we all can relate to, no matter what race we are, no matter what creed. We all, for whatever reason, sometimes have to seem to have to put a lot of our concerns with social justice in the world behind us, especially in our professional lives. And so I want to hear from you all, and this really is an opportunity for you to tell us how we can join you in your work. You know, where have you experienced your call to action, or perhaps for all of you really, how has your call to action been exacerbated from your current work, and where can people join you in your efforts? We'll do our regular flow, which starts with Gregory.
I'm sorry, I thought we were opening it up to the audience there. So
no, this is for you all.
Okay. So again, I just want to live off on, on a sense of consistency. This last several months, we have all been, caught up in this whirlwind of change, and how we can be consistent in our approach, that we're going to advance a new way of doing things and keeping the movement, keeping the movement going. And it is hard when we look at things in such short tidbits, but if we can at least be consistent and stick to those delivery points, that is our reckoning. And I do want to come back and sort of shape this in the legacy of President Kennedy. When he talked in 1960 about going to the moon. And over the course of the next decade, there's a lot of things going on. But in the course of getting to the moon, a lot of people along the way had their participation in that, in that activity, whether they were the scientists or whether they were cleaning the halls and the buildings where the work was being done. There was a commitment to that cause. And that's what I think we need today. That tells me, in the big scheme of things, there is a role for everybody. Everybody can do something. And that is why I say it's not the time to sit on the sidelines. There is a role and a course of action for everyone, no matter how small, no matter how big. It's a piece to try to, to try to move this social discourse into action. We can't erase, years and centuries of pain and a whiff, but we can begin to do little things so that there is a consistent level of, of progress. I've seen it now that the rich and powerful have a very powerful voice. The poor, are mighty in numbers, and they need to have a voice, and they need to be heard to affect that, to affect that change. And so we've got to find ways to get more people into the game to affect that, that change, to really move, knock the trees and the brush out of the way as we trod along the road to create this new frontier, this new path. There's heavy brush ahead, and we have work, to do that. And that's why I say we have to be consistent, and we have to keep coming back. You have to be the voice that keeps bringing it up in your different, your different discussions and activities and actions, and look to create that sense of, I would call it, belonging, so that people want to make that. We want people to make that change.
Well said, Gregory. Terik, I'd be curious what you have to add on that.
Yes, I want to make sure I got everything right as we were getting ready to move forward. And just in terms of being here in Charlotte, I've been in Charlotte for almost 5 years, but what brought me to Charlotte was this sense of question around economic mobility. Charlotte was ranked as one of the least likeliest places for people born into poverty out of 50 major cities, born into poverty, to be able to move up out of poverty. It pretty much had a systematic caste system. And that was something which is, how can a city that has so much vitality, so much economic boom, not have an opportunity for those who are living, born here for so many years? So that kind of helped, my understanding to move to Charlotte, to say, where do I put my anchor in the ground? Where do I put my anchor at? And there's something my old boss would say, he says, Terik, there's work, and then there's your life's work. And when you find your life's work, you'll never be working again. And that's something which is, what can I do? What can we do that's really going to change the dynamics around economic opportunity in this place where I call it ground zero? What we did see with the moonshots in the 1960s and 1970s is that there was a significant amount of economic boom in rural parts of the Southeast. There was federal research labs, everything that created this sense of technology-based economic development, which was STEM education, but it did not transpire across many communities of color in the Southeast. It kind of jumped over those areas and kind of went to another group that we saw that didn't benefit. And then 1980, we saw Nation at Risk saying we are sounding an alarm. We need to really focus on overlooked populations and underserved communities. And I think that is something where now we're at the reckoning is seeing that these are symptoms of the injustices at the core root. When we see, the Keith Lamar Scott, we see all these different things happening, it's because of the fact that there has been such a systematic, chance for folks not to participate in this innovation economy. I live in Charlotte, and we're trying to focus on that. And people are consistently, there's so much unrest because of the economic opportunity that's here. And for you to be less than a mile away and see that opportunity is not for you. And that's something that we are trying to do as the only HBCU in Charlotte, is really provide that kind of pathway to innovation. So pathway to opportunity. Getting folks the opportunity to be connected to this innovation economy, giving folks the opportunity to be connected to a good, stable housing. As I think about, JFK's speech called the New Urban Frontier, and it pretty much talks about it's not that we don't have the ability. We do have the ability. It's just a fact we have to have commitment, and the commitment to ensure there's good housing, a commitment to ensure that folks have the opportunity, a commitment to ensuring the resources are there for a sustained commitment. This is not a one-year kind of idea. This is not a one-year focus. This has to be sustained commitment over time, at least 10 to 20 years. So here in Charlotte, we kind of come together to focus on the Lead on Opportunity work here that is anchored to bring together a cross-sector group of folks from all the different areas, from philanthropy, business, education, entrepreneurship, to really say, here's where we can focus on these areas, and that can have mutually beneficial supporting mechanisms in place to help amplify the work, and also help to move people from the lower stratum of opportunity upper to the higher stratum, so that way they can stay here, grow here, and also build family wealth in over time. So that's where I see it, and hopefully we can talk more about that down the road.
Jordan, could I add a point here?
Of course.
I couldn't agree more with Terik and what he just said, and I know Charlotte because I've been there several times over the past 2 decades. But the commitment needs to begin with education, and there is an unequal investment in public education across our country. And until we have a more universal view about how we're going to fund, education, so that everyone has a equal footing. Right now, everyone doesn't have an equal footing. Poor communities don't have the ability, and the investment isn't there to invest in their public education system, versus the suburbs and other communities where there's a greater willingness and ability to invest in that public education system. And we can't see it more vocally and more in our face right now, as children are struggling to go back to school and they can't, and there's virtual education, there's the lack of laptops, and if they get a laptop, there's a lack of the Wi-Fi connection for them to do their learning. So we've got to, we talk about what can we do, we really need to focus on getting at the core, the beginning is education, and invest in our education, because that is where it all, to me, that's where it all begins, and to support the education that supports the family, that supports the housing. But we've got to come together on education, so the people who are native and indigenous to Charlotte can participate in all of the economic boom that's come to Charlotte in the last in the last 20 years. And absence of that, there's no participation. So we must, at all of our communities, we've got to look to see how do we level the field for education.
And Jordan, I would definitely love to, if you could share a little bit more about politicking and how that is in helping to the innovation around that with the communities that you and Wincuni have been doing, and share more about that innovative action and how folks can get more involved around the work you're all doing.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I co-founded Politicking. It's a platform that's really meant to engage young Black, brown, and disconnected voters in elections. We aren't discriminatory to anyone else. We have information that is important and relevant to every participant in the American electoral process, i.e. voters. But what we really want to do is make sure that folks who have been disenfranchised and traditionally just pushed out from the process understand that any election day that comes around is their opportunity to exert their political capital. It's not the only opportunity, but it really is a time to stand up against or for the issues and the people that we believe in. I think that the climate is so ripe for a web and app-based platform like Politicking now more than ever, because we start to believe less and less in the savior complex about elected officials. We see a lot of people say, especially, Black folks, brown folks, that Joe Biden might not necessarily be someone who's always advocated for our communities, but he's certainly someone that will get us to where we need to be within the next 4 years. Everyone may or may not agree with that, but I just use that as an example of the overall sentiments I think that we have as a country around electing responsible leadership, and not necessarily leadership that, we idolize. I think we've moved past that time, but I think it's so important that as we try to figure out what issues align with this as people of color, that we understand who exactly will represent those issues each election year. And so Politicking, and particularly what we're doing now, is engaging those non-politicos and people who just are the everyday folks. This is the people's time. I always say that in the election. So we're providing content, we're providing the information through the app, and the way that anybody who's on this call right now can support Politicking is to download it first and foremost. We're actively fundraising, obviously from a private perspective, but also publicly. So we have a crowdfunding campaign going on now. But I think that, of course, downloading the app, supporting the app will be helpful to us as in my co-founder and I, but it will be equally, if not more helpful to anyone who uses it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I don't want to take up too much time from Derek, because he never got a chance to just really tell us how we can stay engaged with the call to action that you're taking up right now.
Yeah, so, one of the things that happened with me this past summer when I moved into an administrative position, I've been on the faculty at NC State for 5 years now, was to be able to look at a curriculum. And a lot of times when you start thinking about social action and social justice, designers are sometimes the last people who you think about they're coming to the table. But if you look at the history of civil rights and its action, even the simplest gesture of creating a sign involves some type of message design, so that as you walk down the street, people could read what you were talking about. One of the things I'm excited that we're doing in our college is that we're looking at a curriculum and finding opportunities where we can put in practice, teaching our students to be organizers, teaching our students to be champions of social justice. So over the next year, we'll be developing a new curriculum, at least in my department of art and design, for design for social impact, and looking how we can teach students how they can use design thinking, creative placemaking, organizational learning, these types of topics, weaving it into some of our traditional design courses, but laying with it a connection to real world context with real world communities, and allowing students then to experience firsthand what it means to be a designer with this type of social conscious. I've known this firsthand in the work that I've been doing over the last couple of years working in virtual reality. My whole body of work in VR is about giving people an embodied first-person experience from different historical events. I did a piece some years ago on transporting you back to the Poor People's Campaign, and looking at what it was like to be a sanitation worker if the sanitation workers strike right before Dr. King was assassinated. I'm working on a project now dealing with what it was like to be a baseball player in the Negro League baseball league, and what it's like to deal with tensions on and off the field. So I use in my practice this idea of virtual reality as a technology solution to give people an empathetic view of walking in someone else's shoes. So I'm happy to bring design to the table in ways that we've never seen this body of practitioners come as a call of action.
And I'm excited for us all to continue to support you all in these ways. Gentlemen, I think that this conversation could go on certainly longer than the hour or a half hour that we've allotted for these questions, but I also want to open up the floor to the audience. We have fantastic people from literally all fields, and so I don't want to spend any more time away from them and just letting them ask the questions that they might have for some of you, if not all of you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you so much. That was just wonderful hearing from all of you. The work you're doing and the leadership you're providing. This is I guess it's not so much a question as I'm positing, I guess, something I've been working on myself. For me, so much of this work is among white people. When we talk about consciousness and we talk about a readiness, the even readiness of people to dive in and have these conversations, for me, feels very much what white people have to tackle and to come to terms with amongst ourselves. I have been now a part of 3 different quote unquote white caucus groups doing this work. You know, these are people, myself, who have to come to terms with what has been tolerated, what white people have tolerated all of these years, what white people have kept distant. It can't continue. It just can't. From my point of view, that white people have so damn much work to do, and coming to terms with our own reckoning, and being ready then for the kind of work that you're all doing. And in any case, that's what I've been taking away from the reckoning, and it's the work that I've been doing. And it's been very gratifying to see how white people are coming to understand how damn bamboozled people have been around our own history, the history of this country. And it's unbelievable to me in 2020 that there's this big kind of, and I don't know where the hell we've been all these years. In any case, in denial in a capital big fat D. So for me, that's what I feel very passionate about right now.
Let me chime to you on that. In the work that I do with giving people the opportunity to use technology to revisit past historical moments, I can't tell you how many times I have had uncomfortable conversations with older white people who told me, paraphrasing, I remember those days. I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm not saying it was right. It was just the way it was. And that was a nearly interesting. I heard that on several occasions when people reflected on the past. And I see you making the face, but there are a lot of people who are refusing to go to the reckoning to acknowledge that was wrong. My parents were wrong, or my grandparents were wrong. They are kind of stuck with keeping this ideal picture of who they were. And so the best they could say is, it's just how it was at that time, and I'll leave it there. And what you're hinting on is going deeper and saying it's not enough to acknowledge that those things happen and just giving people a pass. We have to go deeper.
I would agree. I'll just add quickly that I've had many conversations, I think from my perspective, with friends of mine who are white about their parents or families or whatever the case may be. And I totally echo your sentiments, Derek, that acknowledging the issue is just step one, and that's really all it is.
TJ McCundon has a question, and then Brian Johnson.
Thank you, James. Hello, everyone. My name is TJ McCundon, and I think I'm kind of maybe bringing up the lower end of the age range on this one. I'm an undergraduate at Georgetown University, and so I was kind of it hit close to home when you're talking about access to internet and going back to school. That's something that I'm definitely thinking about, and my friends are talking about at school. But I was hoping that maybe you all could speak a little bit more to Wi-Fi access and accessibility as an equity issue. It's something at Georgetown, which has, you know, a pretty well-established reputation as being kind of, you know, much like DC, the rich white kind of hangout, and kind of, I think a lot of us feel that there's been a very poor response from a private institution about this. But when we're talking about this as a public issue as well, kind of how do we go about addressing these inequities in our system?
Great question, TJ. I'm going to jump in. Sorry if I'm jumping a little bit early, because we just had a lot of discussion around digital equity and inclusion and how that provides or supports engagement and learning. In Charlotte, particularly in the areas that we are looking at, and like there's only 35% of people that are in those census tracts surrounding the university that actually have internet. Now, imagine being 1 mile away from a growing city, and only 35% of the population on one side of town has internet. What are we doing around this? And this is kind of around a structural question, which is internet is it a infrastructure need, you know, or is it something that is kind of a luxury? And I think that, you know, we're trying to deal with policies, how we create different kinds of networks in our communities via, you know, mesh networks that support the community to have access to internet or broadband. There's current policy on that's been introduced that's to look at creating a $100 million digital innovation fund for HBCUs and MSIs to work in their communities to really increase the infrastructure around broadband and digital skills and digital literacy. So there's a couple of things. I think what is going to happen more is there has to be some public-private partnerships as relates to investing in the broadband infrastructure, whether it's through tax credits, opportunity zone funds, et cetera, that really enhance that kind of like economic integration via, you know, digital infrastructure.
This is not a new issue. I mean, it's been discussed for a while. It's only been exacerbated by the current situation that we're facing, right now. But it is about access, and it is about opportunity. And again, you've heard me say earlier, consistency. I'm coming back to what I said at the very beginning. We have to, you see something, you say something, you've got to do something. This is a tragedy because we're seeing firsthand children of all walks of life that are going to be left behind in this in this school year. So we've got to collectively here speak up and get, people to, ante up and make a difference. There was a Supreme Court case about 30 years ago, I forget, was in the upper Midwest, where the case was involving free school bus travel for a kid. And because the parents couldn't afford it, they wouldn't bring the school bus by, and the parent got behind. They were actually going after, the parent. In the end, the courts ruled at that time for the school system, saying they didn't have to pick up the kid if the parents couldn't pay for the kid to be picked up. So again, That's where the problem starts, at the beginning, not at the end. We've got to speak up here for education. It is an economic issue. It is a race issue. It is a society issue. We're all sitting here right now, all cushy and lovely, looking at our Zoom call, but millions of children don't have that opportunity. So I talk about consistency. You know the rest of my drill.
Thank you, Gregory. That I wanted to let Brian Johnson ask a question, and then I'll pose a final question if that's okay. Just respecting time. We're just getting into the heart of something that I hope continues. So Brian, would you like to come on and ask your question? Then I'll follow up after that.
Sure. Thank you, gentlemen, for speaking. It was very, very informative. So my question, I'll try to make it very brief. How do we go from being a culture of protesters to a culture of getting in and really affecting change through policy and whatnot? Because I feel like, you know, the impact of a protest isn't the same as it was back in like the 1960s and whatnot. Like, we know that police brutality happens. We see the shootings. There was one in Wisconsin yesterday and whatnot. People are going to protest and whatnot, but there's still no real serious consequence for people who, you know, pretty much commit murder or attempted murder and whatnot. So how do we get in and get people who are disenfranchised and hurt by the political system to believe in it again, and get their allies, you know, white people, you know, other people of color, to like really like support us and help us with trying to affect real policy change?
Thanks, Brian, for your question. I think that's something that I have grappled with. I was a protester. I was in Ferguson back in 2014. Was in Denver for a year and protested throughout. And that kind of raised a question, which is, how do we move from protest to action? I think it's a question of how do we help develop people's leadership ability in these communities for them to be able to take up action. You know, protesting is the language of the unheard. So the thing is, how do we teach people how to speak? How to teach people how to use their voice? How to teach people how to mobilize for change? You know, they're protesting because that's the only action that they know that they can do. So it really is about how do we help develop those people's leadership ability for them to be able to transform their community. And of course, they'll lead up some of the change, but connecting them to those different areas. So I think of it like from three different levers. You have the individual, the communal, and then the structural. You have to develop the individual capacity and then connecting to a community that can then affect some kind of structural change. They have to understand the policies that are not enabling them to have access and opportunity. They have to understand how their schools is being financed. People don't understand how their school is financed by tax dollars. People don't understand who's responsible for what in their own city. People don't understand what campaigns are being supported by what kind of organizations or what's the agenda. So the thing is, we have to do a lot around the education and also around the social capital that's necessary for them to really create that kind of that dynamical change in their communities. So, and then finance it. And that means finance it unapologetically.
I think, you know, I want to be respectful of people's time, but also want to stay on for anyone who wants to stay on afterwards for a few minutes. You know, we're onto something here. I think I want to thank all of you, Derek and Terik and Gregory and Jordan and Keysha, who couldn't be here. Just having you a part of this New Frontier Forum now, I think, changes the the conversation and the urgency and the authenticity of now, we really have an opportunity to think about what this group does. And Terik, what you just said about how do we develop these people in their communities, I like to think that we together are a part of these people that you see on the screen right now. And we don't, and I think a little bit back to Mary Ann's point, that we don't think of what can we do to change or help other people, but what can we continue to work on inwardly and collectively through the social capital that we're building and that we have in our own networks through what we're doing here. And so a question I would maybe ask be happy to let you answer this as we part, but the question I would pose for everyone in the New Frontier Forum this week is we've got two more sessions for the kind of initial experiment of what we've done. And I'm curious if you think something is here that is effective and can continue to be a part of what you all are calling forth and what our country is clearly needing today. And so I'd ask both if we get to the end of September and look at this as a month left, where do all of you want to be with this New Frontier Forum group, with relationships, with awareness, with our capacity to continue working together or being enlightened? And then two, if we stuck with this for another year, what would be the possibility of really a deeper work that could possibly come if we widen the groups, deepen our work of building trust and working on these things? So what would you like to see happening, or where can we be a month from now, or even possibly a year from now if we continue this work through the Library Foundation? I think silence and thinking longer on that is perfectly fine. Why don't I turn this back over to Jordan to have the last word for today, or spark us onward as we move into this week.
Yeah, I just want to thank the gentleman. I want to thank you, James. I want to thank the New Frontiers Network, of course. But I think, to your point, collective experience gets us further than we really recognize. I spoke about this earlier as we started, but what we really have been hearing about as it pertains to empathy is that we've gotten to a point, I think, where we expect a lot from people. We expect a lot as Black people from our allies, and we realize the limits. And so I think that is such a key part of empathy, just obviously as it has pertained to me. But I think that as we continue to use this network, of course, to meet different people or meet people who have similar experiences as us, we also should really use this to really understand what else is happening outside of our world. That's certainly how I've benefited. I'm sure that the panelists will say the same or similar things about this network. And so the only thing I'd really like to leave us with is I think it's important now more than ever to really get out of our own minds and get out of our own biases, of course, get out of our beliefs or just ways of working with other folks, because I just don't think that we'll find any progress, and I really mean this, if we don't really embrace the idea of reaching out. And so I just want to, again, thank everyone for participating in this panel. And I really would call it more of just an overall discussion than a panel, because you all posed some excellent questions and offered just really tremendous feedback. But very happy to speak with our panelists and to meet all of you.